Greetings, fellow survivors! With the summer holidays, or vacation, just about over, Sara and her friends had a close call at the beach. But, in the end, maybe the real danger was not where she thought it would be. But, before we get started, quickly take one of these pineapples and throw it on the like button, just to make a mess. And very quietly poke the little notification bell, now I know what's up there, so that you never miss a chapter of this epic saga. So, with that, let's go! One evening at high tide, when the sun was setting behind the clouds just as it touched the horizon, a warm golden hue fell over the beach that had been a summer getaway for a group of friends. It was a perfect end for what was until then an epic vacation. Sara and her friends had been looking forward to this trip for months, and it was everything that they had hoped. The cozy beachfront cabin that they rented was perfect, and their days were filled with laughter, sunbathing, and campfires in the sand. But as this last evening approached, an eerie feeling settled over the shoreline. Whether it was a change in the sounds, the winds, the smell, or something that would forever remain unknown, Sara was the first to feel that something was amiss. She chose to go for one of her little walks on the beach, leaving the others behind to finish their volleyball game. The rhythmic crashing of the waves had always been soothing to her, and she just looked ahead of her feet, looking for treasures that there might be in the sand that washed up with the waves. But today, the evening seemed to hold an ominous undercurrent for her, and her heart was not quite in it. Looking up, Sara saw a lone figure stumbling towards her in the distance. At first, she thought it was just someone maybe who had too much to drink, which, would be spooky enough, as this beach was private. But as the figure drew closer, her heart began to race. Whatever the case may be, that person should not be there, she thought. So already she sensed that things were about to take an ominous turn. Now, completely still and just sort of watching that person in the distance, Sara saw that its movement was erratic and disjointed, and was a hand missing? With the sun now even lower, the temperature dropped, and you know how it gets really cold at the beach when this happens, and the danger was harder to see than before. Sara had had enough of this, and she turned and sprinted back towards the cabin, shouting to her friends. They abandoned their game and ran towards her, sensing some urgency. Sara's boyfriend, Mark, reached her first and asked her what the matter was. She did her best to describe the person out there, now just a shadow if you knew where to look, and to get across that feeling she had of being uneasy. Something's wrong with that person on the beach. They're not right, she kept saying. Mark followed her pointing finger towards the shoreline and didn't see the person at first, but then he sort of cocked his head a bit, as if someone started to say, behind them. Mark said, "Just one person?" They all turned as one and looked now, and where they expected to see this ominous intruder that Sara had described, there was a sort of wave-like movement of the shadows in the distance, just barely visible as it was getting really quite dark now. Well, and then, with the little evening breeze that changed directions, the smell hit them. Like a flock of birds taking off suddenly in a tree after a loud noise, the group of friends sprinted all at once towards the cabin, without even so much as a word being spoken. Once inside, and the door locked, everyone ran through the cabin, shutting all the windows and closing all the curtains, and "What was that?" Sara sort of blurted out, but nobody had any answers. Wanting to enjoy this vacation to the fullest, they all agreed to put their phones in a locked drawer for the full summer-long vacation, but if ever there was a time to connect back to the real world, it was now. Sara's phone was dead, and so was just about everyone else's except for Grey Fox, who had the good sense to turn it off before putting it away. So as soon as it was turned on, notification alarms came pouring in from all sorts of apps, warnings, DMs, SMSs. After what seemed like an eternity, The bells and chimes stopped coming in, and, not knowing where to start, Gray Fox just loaded up his favorite news website to see if maybe there was something there. It was in this way that Sara and her friends learned that a virus had broken out that turned people into mindless zombie creatures. The virus had spread like wildfire. Most of the cities were now already lost, and all that was left, it seemed, were pockets in the countryside. But even those were falling as city folk ran towards them, taking the virus with them and destroying what was left of the peaceful countryside. Terrified and cut off from the rest of the world, Sara and her friends faced a grim reality. They had to survive all alone now. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they watched the horde of infected individuals now slowly inching closer to their cabin. Well, throughout the long, long night, the group of friends remained completely silent as the horde groaned and moved past the cottage, those closest scraping against the wood of the outside. Well, that night at the table, they decided to make use of a little blue plastic dinghy that they saw chained up to a tree by the water's edge. The plan was to have Mark cut the chain and then drag it into the water, where they would all get in. Well, it was just a matter of rowing it out now from the beach, and then the threat of all of the dead people walking around, and maybe with a little luck too, they could make it to the little island that was not too far away, but, was close enough. They thought, well, maybe if we did make it to the island, we could come up with a better plan there, because we would have a lot more time. Well, Kevin took a little sack with him with some flares, and Sara, who was the only one who couldn't swim, she found a little life jacket that she would ultimately find that would be much more important than anything she could ever have taken at this point. The night was still, and the air was thick with tension and the smell of decay as they approached the dinghy. Moans and shuffling footsteps in the sand provided a chilling background to their escape plan. But, without incident, they reached the little blue dinghy. It was in excellent condition, clearly new, and so it was more than seaworthy. Mark cut the chain as planned, and they pushed it out into the water without a single word being spoken. The early morning light now glistened on the water as they climbed aboard, still trying to make as little noise as possible. The group rowed away from the shore, careful to avoid anything that would attract the attention of the zombies. Behind them, the beach grew farther and farther away, and the sounds of the undead faded ever so slightly into the distance. But now, with the smell of the sea replacing that of the horde, they were beginning to wonder, what would happen next? So, Kevin, he fired one of the flares. After maybe only 15 minutes, but who really knew, it would seem that by some infinitely good luck, they saw the silhouette of a larger boat in the distance turn towards them, and it was now coming directly towards the dinghy. Then, just as everyone had been excited with the idea of being pulled aboard this big boat, probably a trawler from the port city, it stopped in the water and just floated there, with its motors turned off. Then, suddenly, a spotlight flooded the little dinghy, blinding the group of friends. After a brief pause, there was what sounded like a deep clapping sound that came from the direction of the trawler and echoed off the water surface, accompanied by a sharp jolt that shook the whole dinghy, which was now quickly taking on water. Sara just had enough time to realize what had happened as the spotlight turned off and the trawler's motor fired up once more as it turned away to leave as suddenly as it came. The little blue dinghy was now fully under water, and the group of friends were now left all alone in the ocean without any hope of being rescued, at sea in one direction and with the zombies wandering up and down the beach in the other direction. Well, as early morning changed to midday, only Sara, afloat with the aid of her life jacket, was able to make it back to land, drifting a bit south where there were some rocks and a little cave that would be her shelter for the next couple of days. There, she mourned her friends, her family back home, and she got the courage to set out in search of other survivors. How she made it back, I think, is a story for another day. But I think that's all for tonight, friends. I hope you liked this week's story, and I look forward to seeing you again next time for even more. Maybe something about zombie sharks. Yeah. And if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and click on the little notification bell, and that way you'll never miss out on epic story. So with that, until we meet again, stay spooky and keep safe. Bye-bye.